The Columbian is pleased to meet with Republican candidate for governor, Loren Culp. Thank you for joining us, Loren. I'm Greg Jane, the editorial page editor. I will let the other editorial board members introduce themselves. Craig.
Hi, I'm editor.
And Scott.
Hi. Scott Campbell here, recently retired publisher of the Columbian.
And then Callie's joining us. Go ahead, Callie.
Good morning. I'm Callie here. I cover politics for the Columbian. I'll be reporting on this meeting, but I won't be participating.
Great to meet you all.
Again, thank you for joining us, Loren. Why don't you take 1 to 2 minutes to introduce yourself, explain why you were running, then we'll get into some specific policy questions. And right at the top, I want to mention Governor Inslee declined to have a joint interview with the editorial board. We will be interviewing him on Friday, and we also will post that unedited on our website, as we will do with this meeting as well. So with that, go ahead, Loren.
All right. Thank you for having this. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to everyone. I'm a lifelong resident of Washington State. I'm a veteran of the United States Army. I ran my own business in the Olympia area for over 20 years before realizing my childhood dream to be a police officer. At the age of 49, I applied for a job in the city of Republic and been a patrol officer, a canine handler, narcotics detective for about 3 years, and for the last 4 years, I've been the chief of police in Republic. And so I love this state. Lived here all my life except for 4 years in the military. I've been married to my wife, Barb, for 43 years. We've got 2 grown sons and 7 grandkids that live in Washington State. And I'm running not because it was my childhood dream to be a politician someday, but because I was asked by citizens. In 2018, I stood up for citizens' rights, and I got on the national news because of my stance. I believe in the Constitution, I believe in the rule of law, and that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And so my stance got me on the national news, and that led me to writing a book called American Cop, which went to number one bestseller on Amazon in multiple categories for weeks. And that led me to being invited around the state as a speaker to talk to Republican Party Lincoln Day dinners and sportsman shows, talk to citizens about our rights and responsibilities and the duty of public servants to stand up for citizens' rights. That led to people every weekend throughout the spring and summer of 2019. I was traveling somewhere around the state, and citizens started asking me to run for governor. We need to get Jay Inslee out. We need someone that will stand up for citizens' rights. And so that's why I'm running. Finally, after being asked that weekend after weekend in July, talked to Barb, and we made the decision to jump in with both feet and help to turn the state around and return it back to we the people.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you again for joining us. And actually, we'll get into that a little later. I am curious your thoughts on citizens' rights and Initiative 1639. But let's start with the pandemic. How would you assess the governor's response, and what would you have done differently? What would you do differently moving forward?
Well, to me and a lot of people that I talked to, it doesn't make sense what he did. If he shut down certain businesses but left others open, and that did not make sense. If you had a government construction job, you could continue to work, but if you had a private construction job, you had to shut down according to him. If you had a big box store, you could stay open. If you had an abortion clinic or a marijuana store, you could stay open. But if you ran a church or a gun store or a mom and pop cafe, a salon or a barber shop, you had to close. It's like he thought the virus knew which buildings it could go into and which it couldn't, just because he said so. That doesn't make sense to a lot of people. It still doesn't. So picking winners and losers is not the job of the governor. The governor's job is to run the executive branch of the state government. When we have a virus and I'm governor, I will put the information out to citizens, let them know what's going on, have medical professionals in the press conferences to explain to everyone what we should do to protect ourselves, our friends, our family, our businesses. And as governor, make sure that the supply chain is as open as possible for equipment that's needed. And then let free individual citizens decide what's best for themselves, their family, and their business. Because you can't tell me that a barber cutting one person's hair at a time, can't operate safely. But a big box store with 150 to 200 people in it, it's perfectly fine. You know, we have barbers in this state, one in particular in Snohomish County, that's been fined $90,000 by the state, and that's under Jay Inslee's leadership, and I think it's absolutely ridiculous.
So would you have not instituted any shutdowns? You would leave it up to individuals?
Well, if you look at the Constitution for the state of Washington, which is the rule book for our government, Article 1, Section 1 says that the power is inherent in the people and government is there to protect citizens' rights. So what are those rights? So if we look at Article 1, Section 7, it says that no citizen shall be disturbed in their private affairs. So I don't believe that the governor should have that much power. No one person should. The very least he could do is call a special session of the legislature to get the representatives of the people to have a say in what's going on, not just sitting in the governor's office and dictating this to everyone. You know, that's why we have representatives in government. The current governor has spent $164,000 a week for consultants to advise him on this virus. It's a global company that he got with a no-bid contract because he declared a state of emergency. And $164,000 a week would go a long way to helping small businesses that are never coming back because of this draconian shutdown. I believe in being safe. I wear a mask when I go into a restaurant. I wear a mask when I go into a store that requires it. I don't wear a mask walking around in open air outside. I'm not anti-mask, but I am anti-governors who dictate to their citizens without their representatives even being in the conversation.
So you would not have instituted any shutdown?
I would not have shut down our businesses and left some open. That's for sure.
Do you think, did the governor's actions help reduce the rate of infection and the number of deaths?
I don't believe so. No, we have less than 1% of the population dying from this virus, right? And over 60% of those deaths are from nursing homes, elderly people with pre-existing conditions. So we have the governor also who received $41 million from the federal government to help out in nursing homes. That equated to $29 per patient extra that nursing homes would get for extra staff and extra protective equipment to protect the most vulnerable among us. And Jay Inslee said, no, we're not going to send them $29 a day per patient. We're only going to send them $5 extra per day per patient. And this is a governor who's saying he's shutting us down because he cares about our health. What about where the most deaths are at? Why not give them that money that they need for extra staff and extra protective equipment? But this is a governor who's a hypocrite. In February, he signed a bill into law that lowered the penalty for intentionally infecting someone with HIV from a felony to a misdemeanor. And now he says he cares about our health. But does it make sense to anyone that you shut down certain businesses, but other businesses can stay open? It makes absolutely no sense. And especially to the people who have lost their life savings because of it.
So
Craig,
should the governor have shut down grocery stores then, and supermarkets, or that he shouldn't have shut anything down? I'm a little confused here by what you think would have been a better policy.
A better policy would be putting the information out, letting citizens and business owners know what's going on and what we should do, but not dictating it.
So in other words, let individual businesses decide whether to close based on the facts available to them.
Well, what do we have on the other hand? We have a governor who's deciding who's going to open and who's going to shut down. Like I said earlier, a construction site that's a government project could continue. Those people could continue to work. Those contractors that have government contracts could continue to make money. But private construction project had to shut down. Why? They're both construction projects. Didn't make any sense. But he gets more donations from the government contractors than he does the private ones.
So
Okay.
Moving forward, how should the state address the budget shortfall that is occurring because of the pandemic?
Well, that's pretty simple. You know, I ran my own business for over 20 years. I've been a family man. I mean, everybody's got a budget, right? Whether it's your family budget or a private business owner, you've got a budget. When the revenue cuts down, right? If you get laid off, or you have less income coming in, no matter what it is, you don't make across the board cuts like the lazy politicians do, and our current governor. You make programmatic cuts. You look where you can cut and where you may need to add, right? If you're running a small business and you do across the board cuts, which almost all politicians want to do because that's the easy way, that's a lazy person's way. Make across the board cuts in a private business. Well, you're cutting your advertising that you need to get more jobs. If you make across the board cuts, you're cutting your wages to your employees. Across the board cuts, you're cutting your fuel that you may need for your crews to get to a job site. So I will not make across the board cuts. We'll do programmatic cuts starting from the bottom up and look at things in each line item that we can cut. And especially anything that says the word study in it, because politicians like to study things forever and they waste millions and millions of dollars on studies. Politicians don't like to cut those things because that's their way of doing favors for their friends and people who support their campaigns. But that's how we do it. We freeze everything where it's at, get a snapshot in time of where we are, and stop spending. No new hires, no new purchases, no new programs. And then we go through it and look at every program.
So the first question is, would you advocate for increasing revenue for raising any taxes?
I am never for raising any taxes. Currently, we have a governor who said the same thing when he was running, but he's raised taxes 33 times on the citizens of Washington State. The budget's gone from almost $30 billion a biennium to double that to almost $60 billion. I'm not for raising taxes. I ran my own business. I've got a family. I know what it's like to run a business in this state for over 20 years. This is not a business-friendly state. And the higher you raise taxes, the more businesses are going to leave here, and that's going to be less people starting businesses in the state.
And
how would you have dealt with McCleary without raising taxes? Just curious.
There's not a revenue problem in this state for the state government. There's a spending problem. Prioritizing spending is what we need to do.
So, and you think that they could have cut the state budget enough to have complied with McCleary versus Washington, right? Is that what you're saying?
McCleary said that we need to adequately fund education. It didn't say that we had to spend 60% of the budget or 50% of the budget on it. Adequately fund it. That's what McCleary said.
Okay, I see.
You say it's not a good state for business, and yet Washington routinely ranks in the top 3 states for business, according to Business Insider and U.S. News and World Report. How do you reconcile those two things?
I ran my own business. I ran it for over 20 years. This is not a business-friendly state. There's a lot of taxes. There's a lot of regulations. And regulations, especially the WACs, the Washington Administrative Code. When's the last time anybody's ever heard of regulations being cut in this state? They haven't, because they don't. These are put in place. They have the authority of law. They're put in place by administrators, and they keep piling on and make it more restrictive in this state. And the B&O tax is very unfair. It's based on the gross revenue, and it's different percentages for different industries. It needs to be fair. It needs to be across the board. And some of these businesses that are paying this B&O tax based on the gross have very, very thin margins. It's a very unfair tax, and it needs to be reviewed and redone. And I'll work with the legislature to get that done, as well as reduce regulations.
Then why do you think we routinely rank very high as among the best economies in the country?
Because we currently have some great companies in this state. We've got great access to ports, both water and airports. We've got some great companies that are here. But if we continue down this road, they're not going to stick around.
So then if you would be opposed to increasing any taxes, which specific programs would you cut to deal with the budget crunch?
I've already went through that. We're going to freeze spending as soon as I take office, so we can get a snapshot of where we are. No new hires, no new programs, no new equipment. We have to stop the bleeding. It's just like if you lose your job tomorrow and your income's cut, you don't continue to spend like a drunken sailor, right? You have to freeze things, get a snapshot of where you're at, and then go through and programmatically look at the budget from the bottom up.
So you don't have any specific programs in mind that you would cut?
I will have, as soon as I win this election in November, we will be going through not only the budget, but also the WACs, the Washington Administrative Code. And as soon as I'm sworn in January, then there will be regulations that will be lifted in this state that are unnecessary. And we will have a firm grasp on the things that we're going to start working with the legislature on, each line item that we can save money. I'm a little bit busy right now, so campaigning across the state. It's a very big state. I'm doing 2 to 4 interviews every single day and having rallies at night where we have 400 to 1,800 people coming out to my rallies. So when I have some time after I win the election, we will go through those line items and we will find out where we can make cuts, because that's what we have to do. We can't just continually raise taxes on citizens and businesses and think that everything's going to be all right.
Now, I want to move on to a couple of years ago, police chief, you announced the Force Initiative 1639, which was a control measure passed by the voters. What was your thinking behind that? Okay,
you were cutting out there a little bit.
I'm sorry. 1639, why did you say you would not enforce it?
Oh, okay. Yeah, in 2018, Initiative 1639 passed. Yeah, the day after that passed, I was asked by citizens that I serve if I was going to start arresting 18 to 21-year-olds, military age young adults who I saw with a semi-automatic rifle, even a 10-22 Plinker rifle that most kids learn how to shoot with. And my answer to them was, no, I'm not going to start arresting them and putting them in jail, because they have a constitutional right. And we all know what the Second Amendment says, but the Washington State Constitution is even more explicit than the Second Amendment. In Article 1, Section 24, it says that the right of the individual citizen to bear arms in defense of himself or the state shall not be impaired. That's one simple sentence that even a 6th grader could tell you what it means. Now, every public servant, including myself, raises their right hand and they swear an oath. They make a promise that I will uphold and defend the Constitution of the state of Washington when they are a public servant in Washington. And I keep my word. I obey my oath of office. So I made that stand. It happened on my watch. I was asked by citizens, and it's like, I can't do that. I swore an oath to uphold and defend Article 1, Section 24 of the Washington State Constitution. If I do that, it would be violating their God-given constitutionally protected rights.
Now, isn't it up to the courts to decide what's constitutional and what isn't?
Well, can you read that one sentence and not understand what that says? I mean,
but isn't that up to the courts?
I don't find any other meaning in that. And people that, critics of mine, they say, well, that's not your job. The police need to obey the law and follow the law to the letter no matter what. If it says you got to arrest somebody, you arrest someone. Well, I would like to take people back to a couple instances in our history in this country. One of them is in 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama. It was the law that black people could not sit in front of the sign that was the white section of a city bus. And Rosa Parks sat in the correct seat. And then when the bus started filling up with white people, the bus driver stopped and moved the sign back one row and told her and a couple other black people that they had to move now back behind the sign. And Rosa Parks said she wasn't going to do that. The bus driver called the police officer. He showed up and he arrested Rosa Parks because it was the law and put her in jail. And you know what happened? The next day she went before the judge and the judge found her guilty and fined her. So if you're advocating for the police just need to follow the law and obey the law and arrest people, then I guess you're for Rosa Parks being arrested.
No,
And then
I'm
if we look at-
asking, isn't it up to the courts to decide what is constitutional and what isn't?
The judge in Rosa Parks' case said that the officer was justified and fined Rosa Parks. So
But let's
do you
talk
agree with
about
that?
Republic Washington. Isn't it up to the courts to determine what is constitutional?
The courts decided that putting 120,000 Japanese Americans in internment camps in World War II for our safety was justified.
Okay,
The
let's
Supreme
talk
Court
about
of-
Republic Washington. Isn't it up to the
How about we
courts
talk
to
about
decide?
judges? That's what you asked me about, and I'm answering your question. I would appreciate that. So FDR, a Democrat president, put 120,000 Japanese Americans in internment camps, pulled them out of their homes, pulled them out of their businesses, and basically locked them up for our safety. The Supreme Court of the United States said that was okay. That was later turned on its head, and they were awarded millions of dollars because their rights were violated. So if you're advocating for a police officer to clearly violate someone's constitutional rights, then you're asking a police officer to go against what they believe. You're asking them to lock up that black woman who's sitting in the wrong seat of the bus. You're asking them to follow the orders of locking up Japanese Americans. And I'm not for that. I'm all about individual freedom and liberty. And clearly, one sentence in the Washington State Constitution, Article 1, Section 24, I would be violating someone's God-given constitutionally protected rights if I arrested someone under that.
Have the courts upheld 1639?
One judge has so far, yes. And a judge upheld Rosa Parks being arrested, and the Supreme Court of the United States upheld the Japanese Americans being put in internment camps. That doesn't make it right. I'm not going to violate someone's rights when I clearly see that it is a violation.
So as governor, would you determine which laws to follow and which not to follow?
The governor is not law enforcement. The governor currently is making law by mandating that people stay home and go broke or wear masks or they don't, or fine them $10,000 per day. There's a lady that lives in Leavenworth that runs a rescue ranch, and she's a single mom trying to hold on to her farm, and she has people that pay her to come there to see farm animals. People come from the city that never see farm animals, and the way that she pays for food for all these rescue animals, and she has about 100 of them. The way that she pays for that is she charges families a small fee to come and see the farm animals. Jay Inslee told her that she had to shut down or they're going to start fining her $10,000 a day. Is that what anybody wants? Is that just? All in our name of our safety?
So you would be the final determinant of what is just.
On what specifically? And no, you can try to paint me into that corner.
No, I'm
But
asking.
no, if
I'm
it's
just asking.
clearly, okay, I just told you what Article 1, Section 24 of the Washington State Constitution says. And if it's clear to me that I would be violating someone's rights by doing what an initiative says, then I will choose not to do that.
And so would you support, do you believe that any gun control is constitutional?
Well, what does the Constitution say? The right of the individual citizen to bear arms in defense of himself shall not be impaired.
So it can.
That's the supreme law of the land. It says that right in the Constitution.
So can
So
I?
what would you propose that we restrict?
No. So can I keep an operational tank in my front yard?
There are people that have tanks.
And you would
There
not
are
arrest
people that
them?
have military jets. There are tanks all over this country. Do you ever watch the History Channel? Have you ever heard of a mass shooting with someone with a tank? So I have no problem with people owning tanks.
Okay.
How about
Just wanted to clarify.
How about hand grenades? Should average citizens be able to have a hand grenade?
How about nuclear bombs? Should
That
we all
too.
be able to go to the Walmart and buy nuclear bombs?
Good example. Good example. How about that?
Well, when that becomes a problem, I guess we could address that, but I think that's handled on the federal level.
Let's hope we don't get to that point.
I mean, there's lots of rabbit holes we can run down here, you guys. I I chose not to enforce a law that I believed violated citizens' rights. Just like I wish that the officer in Montgomery, Alabama would have chosen not to enforce the law that violated Rosa Parks' civil rights. I'm not going to be that guy that just blindly follows the law. Isn't that what Nazi Germany had happen when the police and the military were putting Jews on rail cars? Weren't they just blindly following the law that Hitler put in place? I don't want police officers that are going to just run around and violate people's civil rights or their constitutional rights just because it was a law. I mean, how did that defense work for them at the Nuremberg trials, right? We have to have some common sense when it comes to which laws we're going to specifically target as an agency. You know, the agency head, the chief of police, the sheriff, they have the say on where their enforcement is going to be, what things they're going to focus on, whether that, you know, getting drunk drivers off the road or working drug crimes. They have the choice to decide, well, we're not going to go after and start arresting people because this is a big question. It's very clear. Article 1, Section 24. Read it a million times. You cannot find any other meaning in there. And so I chose to not arrest someone for that. I didn't want to be the officer on that bus arresting Rosa Parks, you know, just an example. And the left media has said that I compare myself to Rosa Parks. Well, clearly what I've just said is that it's an example of a police officer just being a robot, just following the law no matter what it is, and violating citizens' rights. I am in no way comparing myself to anyone.
Moving on, do you believe that climate change is occurring and that it's exacerbated by human activity?
I do believe climate change is happening. Yes, we used to have yes, climate change is happening. You know, the earth used to be covered in ice in the 70s. I remember when I was a kid, it was all over the news that the earth was cooling and that we were possibly on our way to the next ice age. It was on the national news. And then later on, it's global warming. And now the term is climate change. And yeah, I definitely believe the climate's changing.
Do you think human activity contributes to it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So what would you do to address that as governor?
Well, I would let the free market come up with solutions like they always have. I wouldn't be a governor who would pick winners and losers, you know, and start throwing money and big tax breaks to certain parts of the energy sector, you know, which is a big target, usually a polluter. But I wouldn't be throwing money at certain programs and saying that I'm going to start picking winners and losers based on that either. The free market, you know, is great for coming up with solutions. It wasn't the government who invented windmills for electricity. It wasn't the government that came up with these pretty fancy cars that Tesla puts out. I don't believe that it's the government's role. The government's pretty good at doing things wrong, right? Just look at pretty much any program, waste money. The private industry is best for doing that. So that's how I would think would be best to be to handle it. And let people decide where they want to spend their money. You know, if people want to put solar panels on their house, great, put solar panels on your house. I'm never going to be for taking down any dams because that is very, very clean energy. It not only provides clean energy for our state, but other states. It provides irrigation for our farmers and recreation for our citizens and water for towns and cities all across the state.
And what about, how would you approach the homeless problem in many of our cities?
I talk about this a lot. This is one of the subjects that I brought up when I had my announcement seats in Republic back in July of 2019. And I've worked on the streets. I was a narcotics detective for about 3 years and worked with the North Central Washington Narcotics Task Force, which is a multiple jurisdiction task force. So I've dealt with people on the streets. And in my speech, I didn't call it a homeless crisis like a lot of people in politics and the media like to, because that's not what it's mostly about. It's mostly about an addiction and a mental health crisis that we're having in this state. And I've dealt with people on the streets in both mental health problems and addiction. And you can go to places like King County, Seattle area, and you can have 7 or 8 grams of heroin on you, and the police will not arrest you because the prosecutors said that they will not prosecute. It's not compassionate, is what the left says. It's not compassionate to put an addict in jail. But I have found exactly the opposite to be true. Like I said, I work with a task force with a detective, and we had a 0 tolerance policy for narcotics. If you have residue of heroin in a baggie, it's a felony in this state. We would arrest them. They'd go to jail. They'd see the judge would give them a choice. They could go to treatment or they can go to prison. And what we saw start happening is people getting their head clear, getting off the drugs. They'd get a job. They'd get their kids back. And they would come up to us and thank us for saving their life, because they needed that tough love. They needed that boot in the butt. They could not, heroin is very addictive. You cannot just decide one day, wake up and decide that you're not going to do it anymore. You need that push. You need that tough love. And that's what we brought in so many people. It changed their lives. They're now productive members of the community, have a job, got their family back, and taking care of themselves and their family. But it can't happen that way without that push. If we just turn a blind eye to bad behavior, we're going to get more and more bad behavior, which we've seen. People living on the streets has gone up a lot in the last 10, 15 years. The state didn't used to be like this, with tent cities and garbage and feces and dirty needles in our parks. It wasn't like this, but when you allow bad behavior, you get more of it. And it attracts people from all over the country to come to places that allow this. And it's mostly run by far left Democrats that allow this kind of thing. So it attracts people from all over the country to come here. That's why we've seen so many more people living on the streets. And the mental health side of it, I've dealt with that as well, from the street level. I get a call and a mom has just tried to kill herself. Her kids called 911. She put a hose on her exhaust pipe, ran it in the back window and started the car. And so when the police arrive, and they take someone to the hospital because they're having mental health issues, they see the first level mental health counselor. And that person determines if they need a higher level of care. And obviously someone who's tried to kill themselves does. So then that counselor calls around the state, tries to find a bed in a facility where they could get a higher level of care. And 9 times out of 10, there is not a bed available. And that is the fault of the state government. That's the fault of Jay Inslee, because he was warned that Western State Hospital was going to lose its certification, and along with that was millions and millions of taxpayer dollars that would have come into Washington for that. We have a big problem with that, and I know from dealing with that on the street, in person, it's heartbreaking when you have to just turn someone back out on the street that just tried to take their life, that their kids called 911. It's heartbreaking. But there's nothing that can be done.
Would you increase taxes to build more beds and increase mental health?
That's the lazy politician's idea. Yeah, always raise taxes, right? That the taxpayers can just pay more. We'll throw more money at it. There were millions and millions of dollars that the state lost because Jay Inslee did not take care of the problem of upgrading Western State Hospital. The last report that I heard, there was a $33 million contract to upgrade Western because it wasn't safe for the staff, wasn't safe for people that were living there. And this has been a few months ago that I read this. About 24 million of that 33 had been spent, but only 8 million of it went to the actual contractor doing the work. And now there's a lawsuit between the contractor and the state is saying that the rest of that money went to administrative costs. This is just piss poor management. This is someone who's not paying attention. It's not like Jay Inslee wasn't warned by the federal government that we need to upgrade that or we're going to lose the certification. And along with that is millions and millions of dollars for people with mental health problems. They ignored it. And now we've lost that money. So you add to that fact the hundreds of millions of dollars they sent overseas for the employment security scam. There's not a problem with money. It's a problem of management of the state.
So I'm curious, with this approach, so is there no drug problem in Republic? Have you eradicated any drug addicts?
When I became a police officer at the age of 49 to realize my childhood dream, I went to work in Republic, and there was a huge crime problem. There was a huge drug problem. Business owners, obviously they wouldn't do it right in front of the police, but business owners that lived and worked along Main Street were telling me all the time that they're seeing drug deals go down right on the sidewalks, right outside of the stores every single day. And so I went to work. I raised money, had fundraisers, and the Citizens Republic helped, and we got a narcotics dog. And I went to work, learned how to be a detective, and worked with other detectives. And we went to work taking care of that drug problem. And the other crimes were very high as well. Assaults, burglaries, rapes. And so we went to work, and we worked specifically on the drug crimes and the crimes that go with those. And we worked our way up. We ended up with confidential informants. We did some undercover buys. We took down low-level dealers. And one night we had 3 search warrants, 3 different residences, all at the same time. I mean, this grew pretty big. It ended up, we worked our way up to a person who was trafficking in kilos of heroin and methamphetamine, trafficked them across state lines. I got the DEA involved, federal government. They came because we didn't have the funding to take care of it. And we ended up arresting people that were in his operation, and I testified in federal court, and we put him away for 20 years in federal prison because of what he was doing. And the funny thing that happened after that, after we took down those low-level drug dealers and then took down the main one, crime dropped, assaults dropped, vandalism dropped, everything all across the board. It's tied to the drug culture and the drug trafficking. And we need to put definitely big time pressure on dealers and make them pay for what they're doing, for this poison that they're spreading in our communities. Most people that I have met at the lower level, the users, they're not bad people. They're not bad people. They steal, they commit thefts because they're trying to support their habit. But deep down, once you get them clear, once you get their head clear, they're not bad people. They've made a bad decision. They got hooked on drugs, and the drug dealers take advantage of that all the time. There are people that sell their body for heroin because it's such an addictive drug that they'll do anything that they can to get the next fix. And we can't ignore that. Along with that comes all the other crimes. So that's been my experience, and that's what needs to be done.
Scott or Craig, anything else?
Loren, I'm curious about your stance on the marijuana law that is in effect currently in the state of Washington. With your background, how do you look at that?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the marijuana law. As a police officer, I've never had to fight anyone that's on marijuana. Yeah. I've definitely had to fight people on heroin and methamphetamine. People smoking marijuana are pretty chill, I guess is a good word for it. As far as a law enforcement perspective, I mean, I'm not encouraging people to start smoking anything. Yeah. Right. I just quit smoking cigars almost a year ago myself, but I'm not encouraging anyone to smoke anything. But as governor, I don't have a problem with marijuana, or even as a police officer, I don't have a problem. If people want to smoke marijuana, just stay off the road.
Yeah. Good.
Gentlemen, anything else?
I had a question. So the public safety budget of Republic is $295,584 per year in 2019, and obviously the state budget is much bigger. So how would you, as an outsider and a populist, put together a team that could know where the levers of government are and operate effectively?
Well, I've got a lot of friends, a lot of people that have worked in government, both at the state and the federal level, that will be part of my cabinet. The governor does not do everything. He's not the boss of 7.5 million people. He doesn't run 60 to 100,000 state employees, manage them and supervise them every day. There's an entire office that takes care of budget things. The governor current governor doesn't sit down with that and go through line item by line item. He directs people on what his goals are, what he wants to have happen. And I plan on having an excellent team around me. You know, it just because the budget of the City of Republic is not anywhere the size of the state budget or the federal budget, doesn't matter. It's all numbers. It's all line items. They're just more zeros and more commas. You know, and the team that I have around me, they're going to have the same mindset that I do about the role of our government, which is to be the servant of the people, not our master. You know, we need to be public servants in each and every one of the departments, the heads of which I appoint. So I'm not worried about that one little bit. You know, people could say that about Jay Inslee. Well, you're the governor of the state. You know, the federal budget is a lot bigger. So what?
Great. Well, then, Loren, let's move on. Give us your final pitch for why voters should support you, and feel free to mention any notable endorsements if you would like.
All right. Yeah, I appreciate the chance to sit down here and talk with you guys and explain my positions on different things. The biggest reason that I'm running, you know, like I said, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather. I've got 7 grandkids that live in the state, and I'm not running because I woke up one day and thought, man, I wish I was a politician. I didn't do that. That wasn't my childhood dream. You know, my childhood dream, I was living. I'm currently the chief of police in Republic. I love that job, but I felt it was my duty, you know, after traveling the state for months and being asked by citizens all across the state, I felt that I could help to make a change in this state and return the government back to we the people, you know, who created this government. And for our founders of Washington State to write in Article 1, Section 1 of the Washington State Constitution, the rule book, that the power is inherent in the people and government is there to protect citizens' rights. That's the number one thing that they wrote. That's the first thing the founders of Washington thought about. And I firmly believe that the power is inherent in the people and the government's job is to protect citizens' rights. And when I explain to people at my rallies or on Zoom calls that when the rule book for our government, the Constitution, is followed by our governor and our government, then everyone's rights are protected equally. It doesn't matter the color of your skin. It doesn't matter your age, your gender, your income, or your education. Everyone is protected equally under the law when it is followed. And the reason I'm getting so much Democrat support, you know, they're coming to my rallies. First time they've ever thought about voting for a Republican. It's because they see what's happening with a governor who's not staying within the confines of the rule of law and following the Constitution. It's arbitrarily making decisions for different businesses, for different people, and fining them tens of thousands of dollars if they don't follow his rules. Not even having special session to have our representatives have a say in this. He's just dictating to us what's going to happen. And they're seeing that is not what we want. We want a governor who's going to follow the rule of law and the Constitution and respect citizens' rights and have everyone across the board protected equally. So I appreciate your time. If you had any more questions, I can answer those.
Great. Well, Loren, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Good night.
Bye.